He cancelled the board meeting because of her. Not because she asked him to. Not because she was important enough to warrant it. He cancelled it because when Aldrich Voss, 44-year-old chairman of Voss Capital Partners, walked into his own company's archive room at 7:15 on a Thursday morning and found Quinley Marsh crouched on the floor between two filing cabinets with her blouse soaked through and her hands shaking too badly to hold the folder she was gripping, he could not make himself leave. That was the part nobody would understand later. He could have called someone. Could have called the building's medical team or her direct supervisor, or simply turned around and pretended he hadn't seen it. Men like Aldrich Voss did not crouch on archive room floors. They did not press the back of their hand to a woman's forehead to check for fever. They did not stay, but he stayed. Quinley Marsh was 37 years old. She had worked in the financial records division of Voss Capital for 4 years, 3 months, and, as she would have been the first to tell you, because she tracked things like that, 11 days. She was not someone who got noticed. She filed documentation on closed acquisitions. She cross-referenced numbers that other people had already verified. She came in at 7 and left at 6 and brought her lunch in a paper bag that she ate at her desk because the break room was too loud and too social, and she had never figured out how to exist comfortably in rooms full of people who were relaxed. She was very good at her job. Aldrich knew this because he had reviewed her division's error rate 6 months ago when he was restructuring the floor, and her name had appeared at the top of every accuracy report. He had not connected the name to a face. He had not needed to. He connected them now. "Don't," she said, when she heard him coming closer. She hadn't looked up. She was staring at the folder in her lap, which she'd finally managed to open, and she was trying to make her eyes focus on the numbers printed on the page. She could feel them blurring. She had been trying to make them stop blurring for 20 minutes. "Don't what?" Aldrich said. "Don't call anyone." She turned a page that she hadn't actually read. "I'm fine. You're sitting on the floor. I needed a minute in the archive room. It's quiet in here." It was. The archive room on the 8th floor was one of those leftover spaces that hadn't been redesigned when the building was renovated. Fluorescent lighting, no windows, row after row of grey filing cabinets that nobody had touched since the company went fully digital in 2019. It smelled like old paper and cold air. Most people didn't know it existed. Quinley had known about it since her 3rd week. Aldrich crouched down beside her. Not close enough to crowd her. Close enough that she couldn't keep pretending he wasn't there. "When did you last eat something?" he said. She didn't answer. "Quinley." She looked up then. She had brown eyes that were too bright in the wrong way, the fever-bright way, and there was a small cut on her lower lip where she'd been biting it. Her hair was pulled back but coming loose, and there were 2 patches of color high on her cheekbones that had nothing to do with makeup. "How do you know my name?" she said. "I know everyone who works for me. There are 800 people in this building. I know the ones who show up at 7. She looked back down at the folder. "I'm behind on the Hargrove documentation. There was a discrepancy I flagged 2 and nobody responded to the ticket, and the review window closes Friday. I just needed to pull the physical copies because the scanned versions have a resolution issue on page 43 and..." She stopped, put her hand flat on the page to steady it, or to steady herself. It was unclear which. "I'm fine. I just need a minute. You have a fever. It'll pass. It might, but you're staying here until I'm sure." She finally looked at him fully. She had the expression of someone who was trying to decide if he was serious and also trying to decide if she had enough energy to argue about it. She didn't, apparently. She looked back down. "The Hargrove discrepancy," Aldrich said, settling back against the filing cabinet on the opposite side of the narrow aisle. He stretched one leg out. He was wearing a suit that had probably cost more than her monthly rent, and he sat on the archive room floor like it was something he'd decided to do deliberately. "Walk me through it." She stared at him. "I have a board meeting at 8, he said. "I'm going to push it. Walk me through the Hargrove discrepancy." "You're going to. Why? Because you've been trying to get someone to look at it for 2 weeks, and I'm looking at it now." Quinley Marsh had not cried at work in 4 years, 3 months, and 11 days. She did not cry now, but something moved across her face that she couldn't entirely control, a kind of loosening, before she pulled it back. She walked him through it. It took 40 minutes. She was meticulous and precise, even sitting on the floor with a fever, even pulling pages from the folder with hands that weren't fully steady. The discrepancy was real. A misalignment between 2 sets of acquisition records that suggested either a data entry error or, less likely, something that would require a different kind of conversation. Aldrich listened without interrupting. He asked 2 questions, both of which were exactly the right questions. By the end, Quinley had stopped noticing that she was sitting on the floor. She was just talking about the numbers. That was the other thing nobody would understand later. The numbers were the only place she felt certain. Everywhere else she was guessing. What to say, when to speak, how to read a room, whether a silence was comfortable or a silence was hostile. She had spent 37 years feeling slightly outside of every interaction, like she was watching from a position that was technically present but somehow off to the side, and she had made her peace with that, mostly. She had her apartment and her routines and the neat organized columns of figures that behaved exactly as they should. She had 4 years, 3 months, and 11 days of doing her job better than anyone on her floor. She had not noticed until just now how long it had been since someone had sat down and actually listened to her explain something. "Send me the ticket number," Aldrich said. "The original one you filed. I'll have someone look at the scanned resolution issue today, and you can review the corrected files from home." She blinked. "From home? You're going home. I have 5 open documentation packages, which will still be open documentation packages on Monday. The Hargrove review window. I'll extend it. I own the company." He said it without arrogance. "Just a statement of available options. Send me the ticket number. Go home and sleep. If the fever hasn't broken by tomorrow afternoon, see a doctor." Quinley sat very still for a moment. She was looking at a point somewhere past his shoulder, the way she did when she was calculating something, not numbers, but something else, something that didn't have a clean formula. "Why are you doing this?" she said. It was a real question, not suspicious, not demanding, genuinely asking because she did not have the data to explain it. Aldrich was quiet for a moment. He looked at her hands, still resting flat on the folder, the cut on her lip, the patches of color on her cheeks. "Because you've been sitting on this floor for at least 20 minutes before I got here," he said, "and the closest you came to asking for help was hoping nobody noticed." She didn't have anything to say to that. He stood up first, and then he offered her his hand. She looked at it for a second, the specific hesitation of someone who wasn't used to being offered things, and then she took it. Her fingers were cold. She didn't let go quickly enough, and then she let go too quickly, and she stood on her own and straightened her blouse and picked up the folder with the careful efficiency of someone making sure they looked like they had everything together. She almost did. Almost. "The ticket number," Aldrich said. "I'll send it," she said, "before I leave." She did. He was already in the elevator when it came through, and he read it standing with his back to the mirrored wall, and he thought about the way she had looked at the extension of his hand, the 1-second hesitation, the letting go. He pushed the board meeting to the afternoon and told no one why. The Hargrove ticket was resolved by end of day. Aldrich handled it himself, which his assistant Rowena found unusual enough to mention twice before deciding not to mention it a third time. The scanned page 43 was in fact illegible, a scan artifact that had been sitting in the system for 8 months without anyone noticing. The original physical copy confirmed what Quinley had suspected, a transposition error in the secondary acquisition ledger that had been compounding quietly across 3 subsequent filings. It was not a small thing. If it had made it past the Friday review window, it would have been a problem. He sent her an email at 4:17 that said only, "Resolved. Hargrove review window extended to the 22nd. Take the weekend." She replied at 4:52, "Thank you. I hope the board meeting wasn't significantly disrupted." He read it twice, then he wrote back it wasn't. "Feel better." She did not reply again. He hadn't expected her to. He went home that evening to a house that was large and well-maintained and had the particular quiet of a place that had been designed for more people than currently lived in it. His divorce from Claudette had been finalized 14 months ago. His daughter, who was 21 and studying architecture in Portland, called on Sundays when she remembered. The house had 12 rooms. He used 4 of them. He ate dinner at the kitchen counter reading a report, which was what he did most evenings. He was not unhappy. He was not happy. He was occupied, which was a different thing that he had, over time, mistaken for both. He thought about the archive room once before he fell asleep, the fluorescent lights, her hands on the folder. The moment she had walked him through the discrepancy, and her voice had gone completely steady, not performing steadiness, actually steady, because she was talking about something she understood completely, and in that understanding she had become a different person than the one crouched on the floor. Sharper, more present, entirely unaware of how different she looked. He didn't think about it again, or he tried not to. She was back on Monday at 7:03. He knew because he came in at 7 and his office had a partial sightline to the elevator bank on 8, and he saw her badge through on the security log when Rowena pulled the morning access report, not looking for her specifically. Just reading the report, as he always did. He did not go down to the 8th floor. There was no reason to go to the 8th floor. He went at 9:15 to check something in the physical records room that Rowena could have checked, and he was honest enough with himself to know that, and went anyway. Quinley was not in the archive room. She was at her desk, which was in a cluster of 4 near the east window, separated from the other 3 by a deliberate arrangement of stacked folders that created a kind of low wall. She had a cup of coffee she hadn't touched, and 3 screens open, and she was typing with the focus of someone who heard nothing in the room around her. She looked better. The fever bright gone from her eyes, the patches of color gone from her cheeks. She was wearing a grey cardigan, and her hair was pulled back neatly, and she looked, from where he stopped in the doorway, like someone who had always been exactly this, just this composed, this contained, this unremarkable to anyone who didn't know to look. He turned around before she saw him. In the elevator going back up, he had the specific sensation of standing at the edge of something that hadn't yet declared itself. Some boundary he hadn't crossed yet, but was spending an increasing amount of time near. He called his attorney that afternoon. Not about Quinley, about an unrelated matter he'd been putting off, but after he hung up, he sat at his desk for a moment and thought about the word boundary and what exactly it meant when the person on the other side of it was someone who worked for you, and whether there was a version of this that didn't already have a shape he recognized. There wasn't, obviously. He knew that. He called Rowena in and dictated 7 emails and did not think about it again for the rest of the day. He saw her 3 more times over the following 2 weeks without engineering it. Once in the elevator, where she was holding 2 folders and stepped to the side to make room for him, and said good morning with the pleasant, careful distance of someone who filed documentation on closed acquisitions and had no reason to expect anything from the chairman of the company. Once in the building lobby, where she was on her way out and he was on his way in, and they passed close enough that he could have said something and he didn't, and she glanced back, once he thought, as she went through the revolving door. Once in the lobby of the parking structure, where she was waiting for the attendant and looked at him and said, "The Hargrove filing is clean on the 22nd extension. I finished it this morning," and he said, "Good." And there was a pause in which neither of them moved, and then the attendant came. He thought, on the drive home, about what the pause had contained. He wasn't sure. He was usually good at reading pauses. He had been in enough negotiations, had sat across enough tables from enough people with something to hide or something to want, that silences had become legible to him in a way they weren't to most people. But her pauses were not legible. They didn't feel like concealment or desire or social calculation. They felt like she was listening for something that she wasn't sure she was allowed to hear. He understood that, unexpectedly, the not being sure you were allowed. His phone rang. He answered it. The moment dissolved back into the ordinary texture of his life, which was the right thing for it to do. He told himself that several times. It was a Thursday again, 3 weeks after the archive room. He was in the building at 6:45 because there was a 7 a.m. call with a firm in Tokyo, and when the elevator stopped on 8, he had not pressed 8. He stood there for a moment before stepping out. The floor was empty except for the lighting that came on automatically when someone entered, and then he heard it, the specific sound of a filing cabinet drawer sliding open in the archive room. He didn't think about what he was doing. He walked down the hall. She was sitting on the floor again, but differently this time, not the crumpled emergency of the first time, but deliberately, cross-legged, with a folder spread across her knees and her coffee cup on the floor beside her, and the particular settled posture of someone who had chosen this location on purpose. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. She didn't look surprised. "You're early," she said. "I have a 7 o'clock Tokyo." He looked at her. "How do you know about the Tokyo call?" "I filed the background documentation for the acquisition they want to discuss in November." She turned a page. "The terms they're likely to propose don't reflect the updated liability structure from Q3. Someone should know that before the call." He was quiet for a moment. "Does your supervisor know you're here?" "My supervisor gets in at 8:30. That's not what I asked." She looked up again. "No, you come here often. When I need to think about everything." She said it simply, without defensiveness. "It's quiet. No one bothers me. I bother you." Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one. "You're the second person who has ever come in here. The first was a maintenance technician in February who left after 30 seconds. I should let you work. You should go to your 7 o'clock. He didn't move. The Tokyo liability issue. Page 11 of the underlying agreement. The Q3 revision supersedes the indemnity clause they're referencing. Their legal team either missed it or is hoping yours did." He stood there in the doorway of the archive room on the 8th floor at 6:51 in the morning, looking at Quinley Marsh, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her coffee and her folders, and the particular self-sufficiency of someone who had built a very small, very complete world in a room that no one else wanted. "Come up," he said. She blinked. "What?" To the call. Come up and sit in. I file documentation. I don't. You have information that's relevant to a $7 million conversation. Come up. She looked at the folder, looked at her coffee cup, looked at the filing cabinets, the grey rows of them, the quiet that she had made into a kind of shelter. Okay, she said. She stood up, and she brought the folder, and she left the coffee cup on the floor, which was the only sign that she'd moved faster than she was ready for. Aldrich noticed. He didn't say anything. In the elevator going up, she held the folder against her chest and looked at the doors, and he looked at the numbers above them changing, and there was a silence between them that was different from the other silences. Fuller somehow. More aware of itself. You didn't have to extend the review window, she said to the doors. I know, you didn't have to. She stopped, recalibrated, started differently. What you did, in the archive room, that first morning, you didn't have to stay. I know that too. She was quiet for a moment. The elevator was almost at the top floor. She had the folder very carefully against her chest, and she was looking at the numbers, the way she looked at numbers she hadn't finished understanding yet. Why did you? She said. He had thought about this. He had thought about it more than was reasonable, and he had the answer ready. The clean one. About efficiency, about not wanting to lose a productive employee, about having a 7 a.m. call that he needed to prepare for. He had the clean answer ready. Because you were trying to disappear into a room where nobody would find you, he said, and that seemed like something that shouldn't be allowed to keep happening. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. She stood still for 1 full second before she stepped out. He followed. She was right about page 11. She was right about all of it, actually. The liability clause, the Q3 revision, the implication for the proposed terms. She sat at the corner of the long conference table with her folder and her careful posture, and when Aldrich looked at her, she gave him the page number without being asked. His general counsel, a sharp woman named Osgood, who had been with Voss Capital for 9 years, glanced at Quinley once during the call, and then glanced at Aldrich and made a very small, very controlled expression that Aldrich recognized as the legal equivalent of raised eyebrows. He looked back at the phone. After the call, when the team filtered out, Quinley stood and straightened the pages in her folder with the efficiency of someone preparing to be invisible again. Osgood stopped at the door and turned back. You're Marsh, Osgood said. Financial records. Yes. You caught this in November. I flagged it in the documentation. I didn't know if. She stopped. I wasn't sure anyone would look at it before the call. Osgood looked at Aldrich, then back at Quinley. You should be in this room more often, she said. It was not a compliment exactly. It was the kind of statement Osgood made when she was factually correcting an inefficiency she left before Quinley could respond. Quinley stood at the corner of the table. She was holding the folder very still. You can go back to 8, Aldrich said. Or you can stay and tell me what else you've flagged in the last quarter that you weren't sure anyone would look at. She looked at him. Her brown eyes were the right kind of bright now. Not fever, something else. Something that didn't have a name he was ready to give it. I have a list, she said. He almost smiled. I thought you might. She pulled out a second folder from behind the first one she'd been holding. He hadn't noticed a second folder. She had carried it the entire time, all the way from the archive room, with the specific quiet preparation of someone who had learned a long time ago to be ready for a version of events where someone finally asked. He sat back down. She sat down across from him, not at the corner this time, directly across. She opened the second folder and she began. It was 11 o'clock before they finished. Rowena had appeared 3 times in the doorway with increasingly pointed expressions and had been dismissed each time. The list was not short. Quinley had, over 4 years and 3 months and some days that she no longer needed to count, accumulated 17 separate flagged discrepancies across 9 acquisition files that had never been fully resolved. Some of them were small, 4 of them were not small at all. Aldrich read each one, asked questions. She answered them. At some point someone had brought coffee in. He hadn't noticed who, and there were 2 cups on the table, and Quinley was drinking from hers without appearing to notice that she was doing it. She was focused entirely on the page she was explaining, her finger moving along a column of figures, her voice doing the same thing it had done in the archive room, going steady and certain and alive, in a way that was entirely different from the careful distance she maintained everywhere else. This was who she was, he thought. Not the grey cardigan and the paper bag lunch and the low wall of folders around her desk. This, the person who had been sitting in the archive room for 4 years with a list of things nobody had asked to see. The Delmore filing, she said, turning to the last page. This one's the most recent. I flagged it 6 weeks ago. There's a gap in the asset transfer documentation that I can't account for. It might be nothing, a transfer timing issue, but if it's not, then there's a question about the underlying valuation that... Stop, Aldrich said. She looked up. He was looking at her, not at the folder. She had the specific expression of someone who wasn't sure if they'd done something wrong. "How long have you been doing this?" he said. The Delmore flag was 6 weeks, not the flags. "How long have you been coming in early and staying late and sitting on archive room floors and carrying 2 folders instead of 1 because you weren't sure anyone would ask?" She was quiet for a moment. "Since I started," she said. He looked at the table. At the second folder, the one she'd carried all the way up from the archive room, the list she'd had ready. "You should have had a different title 4 years ago," he said. She looked at him carefully. "That's not why I'm telling you this. I know it's not. I'm telling you because the Delmore gap is real, and if no one looks at it, someone will look at it." He said it quietly. "I'll look at it, and then we're going to talk about your title." She looked at the folder, then at him. She had the expression again, the one from the archive room floor, the loosening that she pulled back before it could become something she couldn't control. She didn't pull it back all the way this time. "Okay," she said. The word was very small. It contained something larger than she was ready to name. He understood that too. He was beginning to think he understood quite a few things about Quinley Marsh that had nothing to do with acquisition documentation, and quite a few things about himself that he had been efficiently not examining for the better part of a year. He closed the folder. Outside, through the tall windows of the conference room, the city was doing what cities do at 11 in the morning. All motion and indifference and the ordinary business of everyone continuing. He had a lunch at 12:30 and a call at 2 and a dinner at 7 that he would probably cancel. He looked at the city. He thought about a room where it was quiet and a woman who had learned to live inside that quiet because no one had shown up to disturb it, and the specific way she had said okay just now, like someone accepting an invitation they had stopped believing would come. "There's one more thing," Quinley said. He looked back at her. She had the second folder open again, to the very last page, a page she hadn't shown him yet. She set it on the table and turned it so he could read it. He read it. He read it again. "When did you find this?" he said. "This morning," she said, "before you came in." He looked at the page, at the figure in the lower left column, at the name above it, which was a name he recognized, which was the name of someone who had been with Voss Capital for 11 years, someone whose office was 2 doors down from his own. The room was very quiet. "Quinley," he said. "I know," she said. They looked at the page together. This was not the end of anything. This was the moment just before, the specific charged stillness of standing at the edge of something that had finally declared itself. What it was exactly, between them, between the page and what it meant, between the archive room floor and this conference table and whatever came next, was not yet fully visible. But for the first time in 4 years, 3 months, and a number of days she no longer needed to count, Quinley Marsh was not sitting alone in a room where nobody could find her. She was here in the light, with the folder open between them. And he was not leaving.